Good evening, all. I welcome you all to today's discussion of the webinar, which is going on for 5 days on hematology in ICU. So, I thank Dr. Shakti and his team for organizing this webinar along with ICCM Bhubaneswar City Branch, and which I think on its own is unique to have a webinar for 5 days, including 20 to 21 topics in hematology in ICU. And I praise him for this initiative, this grand initiative for him. And I thank him for including all the topics, almost all the topics of hematology in ICU, which will be very useful to all the intensivists as well as the hematologist. So my topic for today is transfusion policy in ICU. So we know blood transfusion in ICU is a everyday practice to some or other patients in ICU in our day-to-day clinical practice. That we do maybe blood, maybe whole blood, maybe PRBC, maybe platelet or FFP. So, but every day we come across so whether to transfuse it or not, or wait or repeat a hemoglobin, what is the indication, whether should we go for transfusion or not. So for every hospital there should be a proper transfusion policy as per the recent guidelines. It should be updated time to time, and it should be followed, and it should be documented. So today we'll be discussing in big detail regarding the transfusion policies in ICU according to the guidelines as per the recent guidelines and articles. So around 20 to 62% of ICU patients receive one or more units of blood transfusion during their ICU stay. Yes, we see in our everyday clinical practice, one or two patients day in, day out get some transfusion for the indications, but it is associated with as much as 40% increase in 30-day morbidity and associated with as much as 38% increase in 30-day mortality. So blood transfusion is also associated with increased length of stay in hospital, morbidity and mortality, which add to the mortality. Also, apart from that, it adds to the cost to the patient. It is associated with around 2-day increase in length of stay per transfusion. Suppose a patient has to be transfused blood today. We advise in the morning rounds at 10 or 11 o'clock. By the time blood comes, it comes around 3 or 4 o'clock. And transfusion is completed by evening, say 7:30 or 8. And the patient is being advised for shifting to ward after blood transfusion. But by 8 o'clock, again, the patient is not, no, it is already 8 o'clock. Keep the patient today in ICU, tomorrow morning we'll shift him. So the 1 day extra length of stay add to the cost, and it increases the bed occupancy in the ICU, length of stay increases. So what are the principles of clinical transfusion practice? So the patient with acute blood loss should receive effective resuscitation, intravenous fluid replacement, oxygen, other medication immediately, and the need for transfusion is estimated thereafter. So if immediately resuscitation is required, immediate resuscitation should be done to the patient, and after that only the need for transfusion, if required, should be given. The patient's hemoglobin value, although important, should not be the sole deciding factor in the decision to transfuse blood. This decision should be supported by the need to relieve clinical signs and symptoms and to prevent significant morbidity and mortality. So not only the hemoglobin value, we should not treat value always, but the other factors, what are the comorbid condition, what is the age of the factor, that also should be taken into account. What is the cardiac condition, what is the respiratory status of the patient, those should also be taken into account to prevent significant morbidity and mortality of the patient. So clinicians should be aware of the risk of transmissible infections in blood products prescribed for patients. Hepatitis B, hepatitis C, and few other diseases are transfused. In many CKD patients, we see they go on, for the dialysis 2 years, 3 years, and sometimes they say they are seropositive. So this we always should be alert and keep in mind for these things also. Transfusion should be prescribed only when the benefits to the patient are likely to outweigh the risks. Definitely, if it benefits the patient, then only a transfusion should be done. Should clearly record the reason for ordering a transfusion, clinical diagnosis, why we are advising, and it should be documented properly. And trained staff should monitor a patient undergoing transfusion and respond immediately if there are signs of any adverse effect. So a watchful monitoring should be done during any transfusion. If any adverse effect is there, so immediately steps must be taken. That treatment should be done immediately. So more than half of all the patients admitted to critical care are anemic, and 30% of these have an initial hemoglobin of less than 9. Anemia early after admission is mainly caused by hemorrhage, dilution, and frequent blood sampling. Every day in, day out, we advise some investigations, CBC, RFT, LFT, and some clinician also, we advise the referral. Some clinician come, they also advise some. So every day in the morning, in the afternoon, in the evening, some blood is being collected and sent to the lab as per the rounds. So, if the length of stay of the patient increases, suppose now as in COVID or post-COVID cases, patient stays for 20, 25 days or 1 month, then this cumulative decrease in blood hemoglobin by repeated sampling of the blood also leads to anemia. Later, reduced red cell production due to inflammation or the sepsis becomes an important factor, and 80% of patients have a hemoglobin of less than 9 after 7 days. Around 80% of these transfusions are given to correct a low hemoglobin rather than treat active bleeding. So the cause is most important. Why the hemoglobin is going down, that must be addressed first, so that the overall clinical condition of the patient improves. Not the only the number 7 or 8 that should be treated, but overall condition, why there is drop in hemoglobin, that should be taken care of. So in this regard, transfusion management has been strongly influenced by the TRIG trial in 1999, transfusion requirements in critical care study, which randomized patients to a hemoglobin transfusion trigger of train, liberal, or 7 restrictive. So this TRIG trial has revolutionized the concept of blood transfusion in ICU. They have studied the restrictive group 7 gram versus the liberal group 10 gram. There was a trend to lower mortality in patients randomized to a restrictive policy, 30% of whom received no transfusions at all. So this was statistically significant in younger patients less than 55 years and those less severely ill. So a restrictive transfusion policy was associated with lower rates of new organ failures and acute respiratory distress syndrome. So if we avoid or keep the target less, it is associated with less organ failure, other organs involvement, organ failure, patient going into cardiac failure, or patient going into volume overload, acute respiratory distress syndrome, TRALI. So these things, the complications, unnecessary complications are avoided. So randomized trials in pediatric critical care, cardiac surgery, elderly patients undergoing high-risk hip surgery, and GI hemorrhage have shown no advantages for a liberal transfusion policy. So this should be kept in mind. But in many times we see, and in few articles also we read, for cardiac patients, MI patients, traumatic brain injury patient, keep a bit higher level of hemoglobin value. But again, the recent articles have changed, and moreover, gradually the trend is towards the restrictive strategy rather than the liberal strategy. So a higher transfusion trigger may be beneficial in patients with ischemic stroke, traumatic brain injury, with cerebral ischemia, ACS, or in the early stages of severe sepsis that I said. But the recent articles, recent guidelines in these cases also support the restrictive transfusion policy rather than the liberal transfusion policy. So there is no current evidence to support the use of fresh rather than stored red cells in critically ill patients or the routine use of erythropoiesis stimulating agents. So less than 7 days old is fresh rather than stored blood. There is no current evidence to support the use of fresh blood cells. So coming to the blood transfusion policy, factors that may result in a patient being potentially closer to the critical point than normal. So reduced oxygen delivery in conditions of reduced decreased cardiac output like ischemic heart disease, valvular heart disease, hypovolemia cases, sepsis, increased capillary leak cases, arrhythmia cases, fibrillation or embolism or SIRS, or in severe hypoxemia cases, ARDS. So there is reduced oxygen delivery. Similarly, in few cases, there is increased oxygen consumption, like pain, stress, anxiety, shivering, fever, severe infections, burns, and surgery post-op cases. So in those cases, there is increased oxygen consumption. So here comes the concept of transfusion trigger. So for many years, it was a trigger. What should be the transfusion trigger? Say whether it is 7 or 8 or 9. So transfusion trigger is hemoglobin or hematocrit level below which a blood transfusion should be given. Is the transfusion trigger. So most trials compared outcomes in patient transfused at hemoglobin threshold between 7 and 10. So what is the optimum transfusion trigger for blood transfusion in our patients? So different studies, different trials have been done time and again, which still we'll go through it further in the next few slides. We justify the restrictive transfusion policy, low transfusion trigger of 7, rather than the liberal transfusion policy. So the risk of blood transfusions and risk of low hemoglobin, risk benefit ratio should always kept in mind. Like we had a patient who came for hysterectomy, young female, say around 40 years, 42 years, young female for hysterectomy. And post-operatively, hemoglobin was also good, but surgeon advised for a blood transfusion. And during transfusion, she had some complication reactions. She had cardiac arrest. She was intubated, but there was hypoxic brain damage, and she remained in the hospital for say around 9 months, the vegetative stage, and finally succumbed. So unnecessary, I mean to say, unnecessary blood transfusion should be avoided, should not be done. That should be always kept in mind. But also risk of low hemoglobin in cases where a patient is in septic shock or severe sepsis or increased oxygen demand conditions, in which or active bleeding, ongoing bleeding, in those cases where there is hemoglobin is less, so that risk and benefit must always be considered, and a acceptable hemoglobin concentration should always be kept for the patient, that we say the trigger. So that if the hemoglobin goes below that, we must transfuse. And if the hemoglobin is above that and the patient is hemodynamically stable, we should not go for unnecessary blood transfusions. So the current paradigm of the transfusion trigger of hemoglobin 7 comes from the TRIC trial. It challenged the solid belief that high hemoglobin values are safe, effective, and necessary in the critically ill. It triggered a more focused look at the physiology of oxygen transport in the context of hemoglobin availability. And it raised the question of whether transfusion has problems in its own right. Yes, of course, transfusion has its problem on its own right. So this is the TRIC trial. Transfusion requirement in critical care, a multi-center randomized controlled clinical trial, which included patients more than 16 years old, critically ill, normovolemic, non-bleeding, hemoglobin less than 9 within 72 hours of ICU admission. It was a multi-center randomized control trial which was done in around 22 tertiary centers and 3 community ICUs in Canada, including 838 patients. And the restrictive transfusion strategy to target hemoglobin between 7 and 9, keeping a transfusion trigger less than 7, which included 418 patients, versus liberal transfusion strategy to target hemoglobin keeping 10 to 12 with a trigger of less than 10, which included 420 patients. The primary outcome was studied rate of death from all causes at 30 days. There was no significant difference. The restrictive had 18.7% of death at 30 days, whereas the liberal has a bit more, 23.3% death. Similarly, the secondary outcome, mortality rates during hospitalization were lower in the restrictive group, but there was no difference in ICU mortality or 60-day mortality. There were slightly lower adjusted multiple organ dysfunction score in the restrictive group. There is no difference in duration of mechanical ventilation or ventilator free days. So if there is no difference, the primary outcome or the secondary outcome or the mortality at 30 days or 60 days, then why to transfuse unnecessary blood products? But still, there are few questions like in every trial still unanswered in the TRIC trial. Why liberal strategy group failed to improve mortality and rates of organ failure in critically ill patients? Maybe the possible explanation, greater number of allogenic RBC units, depressed host immune response. The more you transfuse, though grouping cross-matching being done, but there is more chance of allogenic antibody formation or allogenic RBC units, which depresses response. Also, the altered microscope as consequence of prolonged storage times. So this may be the cause for which the liberal group failed to improve mortality at 30 days or 60 days mortality. So finally, both the groups, restrictive and liberal group, had the same mortality outcome. There was no mortality benefit with liberal group. So there should not be any unnecessary transfusion. So restrictive strategy should always be preferred in cases. Similarly, coming to the sepsis, blood transfusion. So this is another TRISH trial which has done septic shock, lower versus higher hemoglobin threshold for septic shock. The TRISH trial, which is a randomized control trial to study the transfusion requirement in septic shock patients, done in 32 ICUs in Scandinavia over a period of 2 years, 2011 to 13, and included adult patients with septic shock with hemoglobin less than 9. Around total 1005 patients were included, and the primary data was obtained for 998 patients. The control group kept the transfusion threshold or trigger less than 9, and the intervention group kept the transfusion threshold or trigger less than 7. So in this trial, they concluded among patients with septic shock, mortality at 90 days and rates of ischemic events and the use of life support were similar among those assigned to blood transfusion at a higher hemoglobin threshold and those assigned to blood, the latter group received few transfusions. So similarly, the lesser the both have the and the liberal group had the same mortality at 90 days. So there is the TRISH trial, the concept of avoiding unnecessary blood transfusions, which removes the risk of infectious, immune, and non-immune related complications, as well as conserving these limited resources. However, in this study, 10% patients in the low threshold group received transfusions in spite of being above treatment threshold. Therefore, there may be times, yes, it's not always treating a number. So we should keep the overall condition of the patient, overall requirement of the patient, why there is the decrease in hemoglobin wherever required, that should be taken into account. And acute coronary syndrome patients are excluded from this. This is to maintain a hemoglobin in the presence of hypoperfusion in the initial first 5 to 6 hours. And tissue hypoxia. So that has to be has to be done, and wherever required of the patient, if required, transfusion should be done. But once tissue hypoperfusion has resolved, and in the absence of extenuating circumstances such as myocardial ischemia, hemorrhage, or ischemic coronary artery disease, we recommend that red blood cell transfusion occur when the hemoglobin concentration decreases to less than 7, keeping it perfusion is settled. If the hemoglobin is only less than 7, then should be transfused. So now coming to transfusion requirement after cardiac surgery, TRACS trial after cardiac surgery. It was a prospective randomized trial done between 2009 to 2010, taking 502 patients to the study who underwent cardiac surgery with cardiopulmonary bypass. The main outcome measures were composite and endpoint of 30-day all-cause mortality and severe morbidity were taken into account. And with this study, they among undergoing cardiac surgery, the use of restrictive perioperative transfusion strategy compared with a more liberal strategy resulted in non-inferior rates of the combined outcome of 30-day all-cause mortality and severe morbidity. So the restrictive perioperative transfusion strategy was non-inferior to the liberal group. So in most of the cases we see in cardiac surgery cases, they keep 6 units, 5 units blood products ready for the surgery. That is fine. You keep ready if required. If there is necessary, we see surgeons keeping it at hemoglobin 10, 11, transfusing 3 to 4 units before the surgery. That should be avoided. You keep ready for that. If there is bleeding, we should transfuse. But unnecessary transfusion should be avoided. So targeting a hematocrit of 30% with respect to a composite endpoint of 30-day mortality and clinical complications. Similarly, coming to transfusion in traumatic brain injury, this is a study which was done in 200 ICU patients. Similarly, the restricted group keeping a target transfusion trigger of 7 versus a liberal group keeping a transfusion trigger of 10 was studied. outcomes were around 42% in restricted in liberal group. Similarly, in cases of liberal blood transfusion group, which is around 22%, and the thrombotic events was less in case of 8.1% around in cases of restricted group. So in cases also, we see the restrictive group has better favorable outcome and less thrombotic events. Coming to transfusion trigger in bleeding patients, transfusion strategies for acute upper GI bleed cases. The primary outcomes was mortality at 45 days, 5% favor of restrictive approach. Other secondary outcomes, further bleeding associated with hemodynamic instability or hemoglobin drop more than 2 gram within first 6 hours, number of RBCs transfused, cardiac complications, transfusion reactions, and mean length of stay. These are the outcomes. So the patients with major hemorrhage or low rebleeding risks were excluded in the study. Patients had emergency upper GI endoscopy within a mean of 5 hours of admission, which is unrealistic in most clinical settings. Many times we see patient comes with hemorrhage or GI bleed. The gastrosurgeon or gastroenterologist always advise for initial stabilization of the patient. Once patient is stabilized, then they go. Unless there is ongoing heavy profuse bleeding, they go for clipping or so in esophageal varices cases. So most of the time, so within 5 hours, is bit seems like unrealistic approach. And subgroup analysis suggested benefit extends beyond those with portal hypertension. And the liberal arm may have benefited from hemostatic resuscitation rather than simply RBC transfusion, which may cause dilutional coagulopathy. In this trial also, similarly, it also, this study, this also tends towards a conservative approach. If there is must be done. But once hemodynamic patient unnecessary transfusions should be avoided. Now, this is a recent article in the JAMA in 2021 February, the reality randomized clinical trial which was done to see the effect of restrictive versus liberal blood transfusion strategy on major cardiovascular events among patients with. So it was an open label randomized trial conducted in 35 hospitals in France and Spain, which includes patients with acute MI and hemoglobin level between. Study was done between 2016 to September 2019. Studied primary clinical outcome was major adverse cardiovascular events, MACE, which includes all cause death, stroke, recurrent MI, emergency revascularization. So these are the main things which are studied as the primary outcome. So from this study, they concluded among patients with AMI and anemia, a restrictive compared with liberal transfusion strategy resulted in non-inferior rate of MACE, that is major adverse cardiovascular events after 30 days. So we had a concept that in so keep the transfusion trigger bit higher or keep the hemoglobin around say 8 or 9 or 9 or 10 bit higher. But this is the recent article in February 2021 which also stressed that a restrictive compared with a liberal transfusion strategy resulted in non-inferior rate of complications after 30 days, even in acute AMI cases. So this is according to the British guidelines for the red cell transfusion. Is the patient anemic and hemodynamically stable? Whether the hemoglobin is more than 9. If yes, then there is no need. The question doesn't arise for transfusion. But if the hemoglobin is below 9, say between 7 and 9, so you see, does the patient have acute coronary syndrome, severe sepsis, or neurological injury? So if there is severe sepsis, initial fluid resuscitation, stabilization must be done. But if there is if there need for transfusion in those cases, depending on the case, then transfusion should be done. But the hemoglobin should be kept above 7. If the hemoglobin is less than 7, then transfusion should be done. Similarly, in the neurocritical care, a transfusion, a target hemoglobin is kept between 8 to 10. But according to the recent articles, according to the recent journals, similarly, if the hemoglobin is above 7, transfusions should be avoided as far as possible. Similarly, in the ischemic heart disease, as we saw in the recent paper, a target should be to keep the hemoglobin above 7, or preferably between around 8 or 9. But if the hemoglobin says 7.8 or 7.9, there is no need of unnecessary transfusions. So platelet transfusion policy before that, for the whole blood, nowadays there is no indication for whole blood. Component therapies are preferred. Whole blood only in cases of acute ongoing severe blood loss. In those cases, whole bloods are preferred, or else in most of the cases, as far as possible, wherever possible, this component therapy should be transfused. Coming to the platelet transfusion policy, moderate thrombocytopenia more than 50,000 is common in critical care patients, often associated with sepsis or DIC. Prophylactic platelet transfusion in non-bleeding patient is not indicated, although this is the most common reason for transfusion identified in clinical audits, followed by cover for invasive procedures. Like means I'm going to do some procedure, so just cover, build the platelet count, then I should go the the patient may require this procedure, the patient may require that procedure. So unnecessary platelet transfusion is being done, which should be avoided. There are no high quality randomized control trials to guide clinical practice in cases of transfusion policy. So few indications: in cases of non-bleeding patients without severe sepsis or hemostatic abnormalities should not be transfused. But with severe sepsis or with hemostatic abnormalities, bleeding diathesis threshold should be, if it is less than 20, transfuse. DIC with bleeding, if it is less than 50, then transfuse. And if there is platelet dysfunction with non-surgically correctable bleeding, post cardiopulmonary bypass or potent antiplatelet drugs, despite a normal platelet count, because dysfunction is there. So the number, though the number may be right, but the patient may bleed. So transfusion of one adult therapeutic dose and bleeding stops, or the dysfunction platelets that improves by the therapy, then there is no need of further transfusion. And if there is, then you can go for transfusion. And in massive hemorrhage, the ratio should be 1:1. PRBC to FFP to platelet should be 1:1:1. Right? So a simple guideline is that if we are going for any invasive procedure, the count should be above 50,000. If there is clinical bleeding and the platelet count is less than 20,000, then we should go for platelet transfusion. But if the platelet count is less than 10,000, even if there is no bleeding, so there is chances of intracranial bleed or intra-abdominal bleed in closed spaces, so there should be transfusion. So 10,000, 20,000, and 50,000. But now dengue cases are more. We see in many cases unnecessary, the platelet count say 37,000, still there is transfusion. This should be avoided. Coming to the indicated for the treatment of bleeding in patients with deranged coagulation due to deficiency of multiple clotting factors, like in DIC, the minimum dose should be 12 to 15 ml per kg, which is almost equivalent to 4 units that we advise day in, day out for the required patients in an adult. Not indicated for prophylaxis in non-bleeding patients with abnormal clotting test. Though clotting test may be abnormal, but if the patient is not bleeding clinically, then we should not unnecessarily transfuse. Not indicated for the immediate reversal of warfarin. And in liver disease, there is no benefit to FFP transfusions in patient with an INR less than 1.7. Many times 1.5, 1.6 advice give for the FFP. So it should not be done. Coming to the cryo transfusion policy, similarly, after the plasma is thawed, the supernatant fluid is removed. Then we get the cryoprecipitate. So adult dose is 2 pooled units. So 10 donor units approximately give around 3 grams of fibrinogen. But wherever indicated for the low fibrinogen, we advise 2 adult pool units. Or it is indicated when there is acute DIC with bleeding and fibrinogen level is less than 1.5 gram per liter, it should be transfused. In severe liver diseases with bleeding, it should be transfused. Prophylaxis for surgery when fibrinogen is less than 1.5 gram per liter should be transfused. And in cases of hypofibrinogenemia associated with massive, we keep a target of more than 1.5 gram. So this was the transfusion policy for the blood products in ICU. Now we come to the transfusion policy in ICU. Once we decided this thing has to be transfused, what is my ICU policy for transfusion of this blood product? So first is blood request form. In blood request for transfusion, the prescribing clinician should complete and sign a blood request form that is designed to provide all necessary information. All details requested on the blood request form must be completed accurately and legibly. It should be clear. The blood request form should always be accompanied by patient's blood sample should be given. The sample is placed in a sample tube that is correctly leveled and is uniquely identifiable with the patient. The name. Similarly, the blood sample the patient. If the patient is conscious at the time of taking the sample, ask him or her to identify himself herself. A given name and names we see in the same name, two patients are there in the ICU. We advise transfusion to some blood transfusion, some other. We have also seen such type of cases. So this should be avoided if the patient is conscious or the tag is there in the check that before taking the sample. 5 ml of blood sample should be collected into a and submitted to the blood center for testing. So the specimen label must include the following information: patient's full name, age and sex, registration number, ward number or bed number, date and time at which specimen was taken, and sample. Next is before going for transfusion, ABO and RH grouping should the patient and donor both should be done. Antibody screening should be done. Cross matching between serum of patient and the donor should be done. So these procedures are a must. Normally take complete, but in few cases where it's urgent request, so lab may help us in giving it bit earlier, doing this test bit earlier. And collection and receipt. Always take a completed patient document issue. First, match the details on the blood request for compatibility level, recommendation level. It should be doubly checked by the nursing staff, by the duty doctor, so that any mistake should be avoided. If everything matches, sign out the unit with the date and the time. Now coming to the performing the transfusion. Once issued by the blood platelet or the FFP should be done of the removal from the blood bank or from the storage conditions. If the so it should be stored under proper optimal storage condition, preferably in a blood bank between 2 to 6 degree. If the ward or operating room does not have storing blood, the blood should before transfusion. Many a times we see this is an issue. When we transfusion, patient having rigor and chill having the temperature. So that should be avoided. Within 30 minutes, it should be transfused. And the blood bag before transfusion. Yes, it should be a must. Now, what is the monitoring during the transfusion? It is the policy of the ICU. It is essential to take baseline observations and to ensure that the patient is monitored transfusion in order to detect any adverse event as early as possible. Before starting the transfusion, it is essential to encourage the patient to notify a nurse or doctor if he or she feels any discomfort, any itching sensation, any breathing difficulty, or flushing, shivering. So that must be taken into account. Ensure that the patient is in a setting where he or she can be directly absorbed. Proper monitoring is a must. For each unit of blood transfused, monitor the patient before starting the transfusion, baseline observation. Before just starting the observation, heart rate, blood pressure, saturation should be documented. 15 minutes after starting the transfusion, initial time is very crucial during which most of the reactions occur. So initial 15 minutes, the doctor should stand there to see if there is any transfusion reactions, and at least every hour during the transfusion, carry out a final set observation 15 minutes after each unit has been transfused. Finally, documentation of the transfusion. The patient's appearance, temperature, pulse, be documented before transfusion, during transfusion, and after transfusion. So make a note of the following: time the transfusion started, at what time it ended, what amount of volume has been transfused, the blood product, the grouping, unique donation number of all the products written on the bag, and if any adverse effect, it should be documented. Stop the transfusion immediately, and what are the drugs to be given if there is any transfusion, and who are to be notified. Record in the patient notes type and volume of each unit transfused, unique donation number, blood group back, that we have already discussed. So to finally summarize, in the general non-bleeding ICU population, the reported transfusion practice was rather restrictive. However, in certain subpopulation, including the critically ill with septic shock, higher applied hemoglobin thresholds were reported, which deviates from the current evidence. So, as for the recent articles, recent journals, the restrictive strategy, the restrictive policy should always be preferred. For other subpopulations, such as patients with ARDS and patients on ECMO, well-powered randomized control trials are required. In addition, optimal platelet thresholds are currently controversial, and more awareness is necessary for the correct indications of plasma transfusion in non-bleeding patients. Finally, a local transfusion guideline for critically ill patients is lacking in the majority of ICUs worldwide. Yes, so every ICU should have its own transfusion policy. What thing has to be transfused, when has to be transfused, how it is to be transfused, what monitoring should be transfused, if there is any reaction, what should be done. So transfusion practice has remained closer to the restricted transfusion strategy as proposed by the TRIC trial investigators than to the older conventions. In the last 2 decades, it has revolutionized the policy of blood transfusion in the ICU. The rate of change varied over time interval and according to patient ICU admission hemoglobin level. The rate of change in transfusion practice decreased over time, but implementation of more restrictive transfusion strategies continued years after the initial large shift in practice. Yes, these changes occurred without an internal dictum, though important change occurred in ICUs. The potential may exist for further application of evidence-based guidelines to our transfusion practices. Yes, over time to time things changes, so we must be updated. What is the recent policy guidelines say? We must adapt to them. Institutions should review their policies and consider interventions that may be effective in reducing inappropriate RBC transfusions. These practices should be assessed over a period of time sufficient for their evaluation, perhaps on the order of a decade. So you must have your own protocol, own policy of blood transfusion in your ICU. We must take time to time, we must update our knowledge, the recent guidelines, the recent article, what say about the different blood product transfusions, and whatever when and as and when required, it should be modified and it should be followed. Thank you. Thank you. With this, we come to an end. Thank you.